When I was a child, one of my favorite game series was King's Quest. I played through the first 7 games multiple times, thoroughly enjoyed them, and pretended the 8th did not exist. I would say that as a child, point-and-click games were among my favorites. But there's something about figuring out various puzzles, even if the answer was a little bit questionable. I even still have an old King's Quest collection with my video game collectibles. And so that being said, color me somewhat surprised when I received a key to School Quest from the dev. School Quest seeks to recapture the old school feel of the original King's Quest, Space Quest, and Leisure Suit Larry Sierra games. And when I read this, there were a few thoughts as to what the dev may have meant. The Quest games are known for a few things, good and bad. Sudden deaths out of nowhere. This could be humorous but also extremely frustrating. There are instances in the game where maybe if you don't have a proper item when you enter into a certain area, like in King's Quest V when you enter into a swamp, if you're not wearing a medallion, you could instantly be transformed into a frog. But you also had annoying deaths. I'm specifically looking at climbing certain stairs, cliff sides, and any other type of walkway with open sides where the slight maneuvering a pixel off and you're dead. King's Quest IV, I'm specifically looking at you. Nonsensical puzzles, and this never really set well with me. I think back to King's Quest VII. You had to shoot a magic wand at a troll to turn him into a handsome prince, but you had to do something specific to it for it to work. If not, you'd get a game over every time. My mother and I had to call the King's Quest hotline for an answer. There was a little knob at the bottom of the wand that if you turned it, it reversed the magic spell. Well, we had the answer, we beat the game. My dad wasn't too happy about the additional phone bill. He didn't really appreciate the $1.99 for the first minute and the 99 cents for each additional minute. You also had a chance of soft locking the game, and that's really King's Quest V and VI. They were really, really bad at this. I can't help but think of the Minotaur's Maze, of the Eagle's Nest. If you didn't have the proper items, you weren't going to complete the game, and if you only had one save file, you had to start the whole game back from the beginning. And I've had to do that before, far more than I wanted to. But also there were Easter eggs. One of my favorites is found in King's Quest II, where as King Graham walks across the beach, there's an area where a witch's home is set in a cove. Sometimes when you walk through it, the Batmobile would come flying out of it, and that was top-notch to me. And so I think a game that could be, if you will, a spiritual successor can do so if you are able to move past some of what we've mentioned. Yes, the random deaths, those can be fine, just don't overdo it. Before we get into this, I want to reiterate, I did receive a key for this game from the developer, but I'm still going to try my best to be as open and honest as possible concerning this game. I also received a hint guide and a walkthrough just in case I got stuck. We'll discuss that a little bit later in the review. And so graphics, let's start off with the graphics. When you look at the graphics in the beginning, you might immediately think, well, this game looks outdated. You might think of some modern pixelated games that look outstanding, and you may say to yourself, well, this looks outdated. That's the design. Remember, this game is trying to emulate the early Sierra games. The first King's Quest game came out in May 1984, a little bit under 3 months from my birthday. Yes, my back hurts. Games at that time were new, and graphics, well, people were often rendered as blocky blobs resembling human beings. they didn't have the same capabilities as games today. So I don't want to judge this game by today's standards, but by the standards of the games it's wanting to emulate. And so the game nails that. The opening logo looks like something you'd see in a Sierra game. And when I first entered the game, I saw graphics of something from that period of time. I can't really complain about that. The humans look like low-res humans, but they're identifiable. The only nitpick I would have is that some of them are idling. I don't know if they're tweaking or paranoid, but they're consistently looking left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. And you can tell characters wearing glasses because they look like the Hamburglar. The backgrounds are very well made and detailed. The text appears in a box with large, easy-to-read letters. That was a nice touch of nostalgia. So overall, I would say that's a positive. When you look at the audio, and again, this game tries to emulate the days of the Sound Blaster. This was a little bit before the days of MIDI sound files. And again, the developer nails it. There are instances where your character dies, falls, or something of that nature. Literally, I heard the sound of someone falling from King's Quest, or, something of that nature. So again, it really sets out and fulfills its purpose. The music does get a little repetitive, but that was commonplace during that period of time. Games back then were oftentimes silent, and if they did have music, they didn't have a soundtrack. They often had maybe one sound or one song, and it looped over and over and over. So again, I'm going to say that they really fit that vibe from this game series. Now, as far as the story is concerned, I'm just going to let my stream video fill you in on how things begin.
Tony is a lonely lad of around 17 who lives in the early 1990s. He is a closeted gay individual who dares not express his feelings, as his family would probably have him committed to an institution. He is also very much a nerd in every sense of the word. Glasses, acne, a nasally voice, and a love of computers make him a common target of ridicule by fellow students throughout the day. His only goal is to survive this hellish existence of high school and hopefully make it to college where he can learn how to be a computer programmer. And with luck, find true love out in the adult world. Graduation is very close at hand. However, something strange has been going on lately at East Guga High School. Tony has noticed several kids not showing up lately. In fact, the halls themselves have become very sparse. It's drugs. They got a hold of the marijuana. While others seem not to notice, Tony has a strong sense of intuition and feels something is not quite right. His friend Eric, on whom he has a secret crush, has not shown up for 3 weeks. Having a very light day ahead, as this is the end of the school year, he is determined to figure out what the deal is.
So let's talk about the story. This is one point where I really wish this game deviated from the days of yore. Storytelling was not always the strongest point in the old Sierra games. Sometimes the story goes from point A to point Z, and you don't know B through Y. And I feel this game is slightly guilty of that. Students at the school have gone missing, and I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I thought we were going to get into something with the teachers. Possibly aliens or some other major plot twist. Maybe Tony's bullies were in on the plot. I really leaned in that direction after the librarian mentioned that the male teachers were becoming somewhat more aggressive. Well, how did it end? Oh, not like that. Honestly, I feel like the main villain came out of left field. And to be honest with you, we really didn't do anything about that in the end. We just gave him the game's equivalent of a Snickers because you're not you when you don't have a Snickers, and he just leaves us alone. Considering that the school's boiler room was basically turned into a dungeon, maybe there was a little bit more that needed to be said about that in the end. I really feel there were huge possibilities in this story, but in the end I felt like it fell flat. Students have gone missing, and with the right story, I could wind up uttering the line, every indie game at some point becomes Five Nights at Freddy's. But I'm unable to do that. And granted, I could have missed something in the text. I didn't talk to every teacher, every student. Maybe I missed something. At the same time, I don't think that you have to talk to every single person to be able to piece the story together. Another thing that bothered me is that our character sometimes felt out of character. And here's what I mean by that. At one point, Tony has to construct a sandwich, but he doesn't know how. Literally, the school's cafeteria worker tells him, there's the parts of the sandwich, go make it, and Tony says, I don't know how to do that. Well, I'm assuming at this point, he's a genius-level figure with very little life experience. He spent most of his time in his computer room, either coding, or repairing, or building, or upgrading. He doesn't know a whole lot about the outside world. That's not completely unheard of. Later, we talk to a student in the home ec class, and we give him advice on a complicated recipe. Just add more butter. And the advice works out, and how is it that we don't know how to make a sandwich, but maybe I'm just thinking too hard, but I did feel like that was a bit out of character. A lot of the characters feel like flat, one-dimensional stereotypes. That's probably because the developer is basing it off of the stereotypes of the 90s. You have the nerds, the jocks, the bullies, the pervs, the band geeks, the authority figures, so on and so forth. If you're looking for depth in characters, you're not going to find it in this game. And that brings us to playability. Let's start with the controls. This game plays a lot like the King's Quest games, starting with King's Quest IV and moving forward. That's a good thing. The earlier games, you moved left, right, up, and down, with the left, right, up, and down buttons. And if you were moving forward and wanted to stop, you'd tap the button again, and you'd stop. And this could be extremely frustrating at times, because when you reached the stairs without a banister, narrow mountain path, you had to use extreme precision. You were tap, 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 precariously maneuvering your character down that pathway, hoping you're not a pixel off and falling to your doom. If you did, you hope that you saved your game recently. To perform actions, you had to type what you wanted to do. And this wasn't always a bad thing in and out of itself. If you got into an area, you could type look, and the game would cover the high points. Sometimes, though, the game didn't always point things out, and so it was easy to miss certain things you needed. And because you couldn't click to look at things, specific things, you kind of missed out sometimes. Other times you're placed in a position where maybe you got an ogre or a wolf or a witch making a V-line in your direction, and you have to type in what to do. And if you make a typo, you die. And so the player is hoping they save the game because they accidentally said use shing slot instead of slingshot. So that could be frustrating. Now from 4 forward, you could go to the top of the screen and you'd have a menu bar that would have the options, the ability to look, to walk, to speak, and even had a box you could click on that would show your inventory, so you could click on your inventory items and go from there. That was amazing, and it was a great improvement upon the game. You could also right-click, and you could cycle through the look, walk, speak, and if you wanted to walk, your character, instead of, walking in this disjointed fashion, would just move from point A to point B quite easily. If there's something in your way, they would walk around it. It was easy enough. Well, you can still do the tap, 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 tap method to move around, but using that cycling process in the upper bar, in my opinion, really improved the gameplay of this, as opposed to having to type, look, use, talk to, and so on and so forth. So that's a positive thing. Let's talk about some of the negatives, though. There are some sudden death moments, and that in and out of itself is not a bad thing. I laughed my head off at the start of the game when I walked down and was immediately flattened by a bus. Job well done there. My problem is with the puddles and the wet floor signs. They randomly appear in the hallway, and I have a slight problem with them. At times I felt the hitboxes were larger than they should have been. My character had cleared them, but still slipped, fell, and it was game over. That's a reminder that when you play any point-and-click game, save early, save often, have multiple save files if you need to. My other problem is that sometimes I would exit a room, and the moment that I spawned at the entrance, there was a puddle where my character was standing, and it was an instant game over. I appreciate the fact that the developer wanted to be somewhat random with these, but it should never spawn in an instance where you don't have an opportunity to escape death. I really, really did not like that. They should never appear in front of a door like that. But I think that may be something that they can patch and change. At least I hope so. There are some nonsensical puzzles. And this is where my main frustration with the game came. Because there were two major areas where I spent more time looking than I should have, and it was because of an error in the game. So the worst one was around the middle of the game. And this is where I want to remind us that I was given game hints and a walkthrough by the developer. Very appreciative of that. I tried not to use these often, but I was stuck. I was to find a character that was in the English classroom to talk to him. Well, at the top of the screen, you're given your location. And it didn't click in my head at the time, but there were two math departments, but no English. And so I spent 10 minutes looking for it, couldn't find it, so what does the hint guide say? I need to get a complaint form, and I need to get it so the teacher will be forced out of the classroom. Now, that doesn't really tell me its location. But I got the complaint form, I turned it in, and I thought, well, maybe something will open up and it'll let me know where the English department was at. It didn't. I spent another 10 minutes looking, and that's when I realized there are two math departments. So I decided to enter into a door in one of these departments, and lo and behold, it's the English classroom. Well, I spent like 20 plus minutes trying to find this thing, and that really took me out of this game. Now again, this is something that can be patched out, but it really does take away the experience of playing. The other instance is when I was looking for Mike Pizzaz's locker. And again, I looked through every single locker multiple times. And oddly enough, I did find an Easter egg. I can only assume that the developer is a fan of the Twilight series, as one of the lockers belongs to Stephanie Meyer. But I looked and I looked and I looked and I looked until I found one that said Mike Pizzenti. And I'm like, I'm going to try this. I'm frustrated. I'm going to try this, and the locker opens and it suddenly says Mike Pizzaz's locker. And again, I'm very frustrated. Now, as of May 20th, this has been fixed. And so it no longer says Mike Pizzenti, it says Mike Pizzaz. And so, again, it's good that they patched it and fixed this for future playthroughs. But for the one I did, again, it really took away from the experience. And I really felt that this hurt the game as a whole, because when you go through 2 instances like that, I'm going to finish this game, but I'm not really going to look forward to doing that. Thankfully, there were no other major issues like that. Now, I did find, real quick, one other Easter egg, and that is the fact that there was one student named Rob Schneider. Now, I was hoping that we'd get kind of the South Park joke of Rob Schneider is a student. And I didn't really get that. And that's fine. I did think it was interesting that you had Rob Schneider and you had Stephanie Meyer in the game, or at least their names mentioned. And there may have been other names that I didn't catch, but it's nice seeing those 2 Easter eggs there. So I want to say in playability, this winds up being a bit of a mixed bag for me. There were things I really liked, but there were also things that really took away from my experience in playing this game. And so that brings us now to the verdict. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you how I grade games. The graphics and the sound aren't really the biggest thing to me. Like, if a game plays well, but doesn't look the best, that's fine by me. But if a game doesn't play all that great, that's where I have issues. So I have to give this game, at least in my mind, if you want to go out of 10 score, I'm going to give it a 6.5. But let's not get confused here. This is not an IGN review. With IGN, if you get a 9.5, it's a garbage game. That's not what I'm saying. This still has a lot of marks of a good, enjoyable video game. The game does a really good job of giving off that old Sierra feel. And the graphics fit that motif. The sound does it as well. The playability is a bit of a mixed bag. Again, I'm grateful of the fact that they chose to do the game style based off of the later Sierra video games, where you're able to cycle through what you can do, or going to the top bar and change things that way. It makes playing a lot easier. It makes it better for the player. But when you have those issues like the game had, again, it really takes away from the experience. I also wish that the story was a little bit better in the end. And here's the thing about this. Again, I don't want us to think that I'm being overly negative about the game. Here's why. This is this developer's first game. And here's what that means. First of all, I know for a fact they're doing a serious job of trying to make this game the best they can. It was released in February, and there are consistent updates to fix mistakes that are in it. Like I said, May 20th, the issue that I had with Mike Pizzazz is gone. They fixed that. I'm pretty sure they can fix the math room, and if any other thing like this arises from someone else's playthrough, that can be fixed as well. They want to make the best game they possibly can. Well, here's what that means. When you release a second game, you can take the things you learned while making this first one to make the second experience the best you possibly can. You can build on the things that you did right and improve on the things that maybe didn't go the way that you wanted it to. So I want you to keep that in mind when making that decision. If you're a fan of point-and-click games, especially the Sierra game series, the $4.99 price tag is worth it. And so, would I recommend this game? Yes, with the caveat of, it's like an older video game. You're going to get an older video game experience, and you have to bear that in mind when you play it. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the video today. If you liked what you heard, give it a like, maybe a comment, maybe subscribe. If you made it this far, in the comment box below, do you ever play any of the old Sierra games? If so, what was your favorite game? My favorite was probably King's Quest VI because it was modern enough at the time to really tell that story. And I think it was the first one I ever beat. And so it kind of holds a special place in my heart. So King's Quest VI was my favorite. Which one did you like the best? And as always, be good to one another, love one another, God bless, and let's game in good health.